Hey there, friends, and welcome to another edition of Strange Planets. And if you'd like to get deeper into Strange Planet, you might want to consider becoming a premium subscriber. It's real easy to do. Just click the link you'll find in the episode description, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. You get commercial-free listening, although I love my sponsors, but it's nice once in a while to have commercial-free listening. You get bonus episodes, a subscription to my monthly newsletter, Inner Sanctum, and more. Supporting strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. Very timely, today's discussion on transhumanism and artificial intelligence, specifically transhumanism, because today it was announced by Elon Musk and his company Neuralink that they are beginning human trials with this computer brain interface. And it's a very controversial subject, as is the subject of transhumanism. It's actually all rather chilling as far as I'm concerned. And that's where we're headed in over the next 45 minutes or so. Aaron Franz is a podcaster. The Age of Transitions was created back in 2008, and he's also co-host of the Uncle podcast. He's been doing media commentary on topics like transhumanism and artificial intelligence, propaganda, esoteric religion, and much more. And he's the author of the book Revolve, Man's Scientific Rise to Godhood. Aaron Franz, welcome to Strange Planet. How are you?
Very well, and thank you for having me here, Richard.
We should point out the Age of Transitions. That is part of Chuck Ocelli's. Chuck has been on the program before talking about JFK, and that's part of his network, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I'm live on the Ocelli Radio Network. Chuck is my producer. We're live on Sunday nights there on Ocelli.com. It's 10 p.m. to midnight. My shows run. I do the Age of Transitions, and the second hour switches over to Uncle the Podcast. Two different shows, but we do them both. And yeah, it's great working with Chuck. So yeah, he's a great guy.
Just tell us a little bit about the Age of Transitions. What's it all about?
Well, it's now a podcast. As you mentioned there in the opener, originally I made a video with the same title, The Age of Transitions, in 2008. It's made this hour-long video that I posted to Google Video. It was about transhumanism, emerging technology. And it did quite well. It was a long time ago, but it was a similar world in some ways, the internet media landscape, but much different as well. But right off the bat, it started getting a lot of views, and people had me. I got invites to shows and things like that. So I started appearing on shows. I just kind of hung around the media sphere from there. I ended up doing my own show, which again is the Age of Transitions now. I've written the book Revolve, Man's Scientific Rise to Godhood. I've just continued to follow the subject of transhumanism, emerging technology, and lots of other stuff. I mean, my interests are wide. I try to get like a broad, big picture idea of the world is my goal. And we get as close to mark as is possible. And one person can only do so much, but it's been good. It's been a good number of years.
Were you talking about transhumanism and artificial intelligence back in 2008?
Yes, yeah. That was my debut, so to speak. The video, The Age of Transitions, that's what it was about, really. It was transhumanism was the topic. And I stumbled onto it actually. I started getting into activism with I was involved before that, a couple years before, with the 9/11 Truth group in Ohio. I was living in Ohio, and so I was going down the rabbit hole, or whatever you want to call it. I was getting into alternative ideas and things like that. And I stumbled upon a Wikipedia article about transhumanism one day. I kind of put it in the context of everything else I had been seeing. I'm like, Well, they're saying that all these high technologies are going to come, and the transhumanist idea is that it's going to be beneficial to mankind, and that we're all going to be uplifted, made even into a better organism, right? Like taking control of our own evolution and making ourselves better. And I was instantly kind of skeptical and saying, well, what if it were the other way around, where it was just another tool of control? And almost you look at it, the idea is things like brain implants and all that, and you're mentioning Neuralink now, like how could that really not go in that direction, at least? I mean, it's just that it was just almost like a gut reaction. I think everybody's gut reaction is that, but then I've read a lot of different material to try to inform myself, everything from like government white papers to books to just articles, and trying to and the interesting works of those who call themselves the transhumanists as well. Even like their sort of blogs and stuff are fascinating to read and see what their actual opinions are. So gone through a lot of different materials over the years.
I remember maybe the early mid 2000s, and as you mentioned, it was just coming into sort of the public consciousness. People like Ray Kurzweil talking about, imagine if we could re-sleeve our consciousness, and the possibility of immortality or dramatic life extension is like within our grasp. And back then it was all kind of theoretical. So when you started talking about it, and maybe we could see it sort of, it was something in the future, off on the horizon, and now it's here. Did you ever imagine back in 2008 that just 15 years later we would be where we're at right now? Again, Elon Musk talking about a human trials for a brain computer interface and putting chips in our brains and so forth.
Well, yeah, actually, I would say yes, I did, because as you're saying, at the time, it seemed very sci-fi, and the ideas were very on the edge, and none of it had actually happened as of yet. So a lot of people just weren't paying attention because it's like, oh, that's that. What are they even talking about? Like none of that stuff is around. AI has been a field of research for decades and decades and decades, but
Yeah, machine learning, they used to call it.
yeah, absolutely. And it has a rich history, but I mean, for a long time, it just they weren't making much headway, and now recently that's changed dramatically. But yeah, I mean, I saw that stuff years ago, and I it didn't seem like that far of a stretch of possibility, really. And I was like, yeah, those things. It seems like we're pretty much on our way to all that. And certainly, I mean, you got to be careful with. I don't know if conscious machines are going to appear tomorrow. And sometimes I think the idea of like artificial general intelligence, a machine that actually is self-aware and can think in the way that we humans do, the way we think of actually thinking and consciousness. You know what? I don't even know if it matters if it shows up, because the narrow systems are just so powerful, and they're being deployed everywhere across the whole of society, and it's just obvious to see now. But yeah, it wasn't so obvious then. You had to kind of like take the word of a guy like Ray Kurzweil, which I would understand why you wouldn't want to do that. You know what I mean? But yeah, here we are. We're in the future.
So let's talk a little bit about. I guess this is a great example of what we're talking about, and that's the merger of humans with machines. So, can you explain in layman's terms how Elon Musk's Neuralink technology would work, and maybe what you see as the benefits, if any, and the pitfalls?
Well, technically speaking, I don't know all the ins and outs. I do believe it has to do with the implant has small little electrodes that somehow fuse with the brain's neurons. I'm not sure how it does that. It does, but it creates an interface, brain machine interface, where the chip, the Neuralink implant is able to read the neuronal activity and translate that into its systems so that you can go about controlling machines or what have you, doing all the fun Neuralink stuff. Um, wait, what was the other part of the question?
But just what are the proposed benefits, and then what do you see maybe as some of the areas of concern with such technology?
Sure. I mean, the benefits of these things go on and on. Everything from, you'll be able to use a computer without even touching it, just by basically thinking. So, you are one with the computer. You don't have to, even to the extent of your device, it's more a part of you. So things are easier, quicker, um, things such as that. But also, a lot of brain implant technologies have been uh, put out there as cures for like Parkinson's and things like that. So you might end up seeing more of that, I would assume, in the future's medicinal uses of things that you wouldn't think would be things like the Neuralink style implants. I know that they've been working with that for a while. They haven't made any public pronouncements, or that they're not about to use it as actual therapies, but I would not doubt that in the future. So it runs the gamut.
I mean, it's
Of
pretty hard to argue, or maybe it's not. I mean, how do you mount an argument against a device that could help someone, let's say, who's a quadriplegic, function in their own home? Let's say that is, the home is completely wired to a computer so that you could, I don't know, turn on the television or open unlock a door and so forth. Is there an argument against that?
I mean, it's hard to argue against that, and applying it to that. I mean, I'm not here to do that, and if they're going to use it for that, then fine. But it's the thing that troubles me is when these things start becoming ubiquitous to the point where, if we would get to a point where a Neuralink interface would be the new version of a cell phone, right? So everybody has it. You use it just to go about your daily business, and it's another surveillance tool, really, because with all of all of technology has already been used to do that. So, the issue of personal privacy, is one that's so intense, and it's almost impossible to uphold personal privacy when you get into this sphere, that certain transhumanists have actually been like, yeah, we concede that. So the answer is, we just have to surveil everything all the time. I know Ben Goertzel is a famous AGI expert and researcher, and he's promoted the idea of surveillance, where everybody can just see anybody else at all times, everything they do. And that's just like, again, that's the answer. It's like, well, everything's surveilled, so let's just be completely open. Everybody sees everything. There is no such thing as privacy anymore. So, what I mean? That's the world you end up going into eventually when you start taking these on to such an extent.
This idea, though, of merging the human brain with a computer. Um, some of the, I think it was the Royal Aeronautical Society or something, talking about mind meld and being able to control an aircraft with your brain. Uh, aren't we doing that already, sort of in part? Maybe they haven't perfected it, but aren't we basically controlling machines now with human thought?
There there's been experimentation in this realm, and I mean, you could argue that even drone technology that you're piloting remotely is sort of like that. You just have a controller. So the next step would be just take the controller away. It's the mind is the controller, right? And yeah, there have been experiments. I mean, it's basically a foregone conclusion. I don't see how it's not going to happen. So, uh, yeah, here we are.
Yeah. Is the concern mainly, privacy and surveillance, or is it that when we merge our brain with a machine, that the line sort of where humanity ends and the machine takes over becomes blurred, and so we end up losing part of our humanity, what it means to be human?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I would actually argue that the process is kind of already started. And sometimes when I look online, I'm perusing social media, and I mean, I'm an older guy now myself. I consider myself, I'm not as young as I used to be. So I have that sort of bias, like, looking at all this, like the old guy doesn't just understand, right? But nonetheless, I look over all of this uh, communication, and definitely I see like there's definitely like vernacular, and there's like it's a mode of communication. It's almost like its own language, like to be able to speak Twitter, right?
Mm.
Because if you just hop on Twitter and you try to make sense of it, like you throw somebody on there, they don't really get it. Like it takes a little while to get in there, but then you get into like meme culture, and you get like all the strange imagery that people use, and there's all these weird associations build up. So you'll get like all these images pop up on your feed. And again, if somebody were just to hop in there, like Brendan Fraser and Encino Man would look at it, and he wouldn't be able to make, heads or tails of it.
Yeah,
I
I'm
feel like
Encino
that
Man.
myself. Yeah,
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 I'm
I know,
Encino
right?
Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So you don't. Yeah.
Um, when I look at and talk to younger people, and I have 16-year-old, almost 17-year-old twin boys. I sit back and I listen to them talk, and I'm sometimes around the breakfast table, and I need like a United Nations translator or something because I don't speak the same language. I don't the cultural references are totally different. Um, I almost think that I don't know where the cutoff point is, but certain generations almost constitute a separate species at this point. And I'm not being flippant. I mean, the the way that their brains are wired, um, their frames of reference, how they perceive the world, it how do they interact with it? It's it's alien to me.
Yeah, I think we have difficulty just as, human species kind of understanding the import of the immaterial space, right? Things that aren't actual physical, tangible. Although we spend increasing amounts of time in these weird ethereal zones, like you're online, you could I would argue you're living online, right? You have an online life. I think people put it this way even. uh I feel like people want to like separate that, like, oh, internet is just this thing, and it's like this thing that I do, it's like reading or something. But I would argue like it's an actual space that we're living and existing in. It's being built up more and more. And if you think of it in a transhumanist, like from that point of view, like the virtual world is getting bigger and bigger, and there's more data being poured into it all the time. And that's kind of like a so what thing, like, yeah, we're making data, we're everything we do data. Nobody can make any sense of it. And I say, yeah, no human being could ever make sense of it. You're right. What about an artificial intelligence system that its whole job is to sift through data and find patterns and make use of that? That's what the AI systems are all about, as far as I'm concerned. So like there's that whole aspect in the background. Meanwhile, we're living in there. We are actual human beings in that space. And those weird images you see popping up on your feed that to me don't make any sense, it makes a lot of sense to somebody else. And I don't know. It gets really surreal. is the thing. Like, it's surreal and it's a bit of a trip, as they say, right? But I think we need to start getting our heads around these concepts and getting a better grip on things that you can't grip, so to speak, right? You can't hold these things, but that doesn't mean it's not important, right?
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of I'm up here in Canada, of course, and we have we lay claim to the late great Marshall McLuhan, a communications theorist. The medium is the message, but he also talked about the advent of satellite technology after they launched Sputnik, and how we live at that point. We began to live in this electronic world, and the technology had this effect that it almost pulled us out of our bodies. And now we're, as you mentioned, with the internet, we're all like living out there. We're outside of our bodies, and we're living at the speed of light. And so maybe, this goes back decades. This isn't new. I mean, maybe it started with Sputnik in 54 or whenever that was. But the acceleration in technological advancement is it's dizzying. And I don't know if it may be too much for some people like me, like the Encino man, like me. I don't know. We can, and it's an amoral question, really. It's without judging whether the technologies are good or evil. It just is, and whether certain generations can adapt to it, or just get sort of rolled under by it. We'll pick up on this conversation when we come back. Aaron Franz is with us, and he is the author of Revolve: Man's Scientific Rise to Godhood, and he's also the host of the Age of Transitions podcast. Back with more of our conversation right after these. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. Aaron Franz is with us, the Age of Transitions podcast, and he's co-host of Uncle, the podcast. Gotta ask, it's a rather interesting name. What is Uncle, the podcast?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Richard. Uncle the Podcast is a comedy show. Again, it's the second half of the live 2-hour show I do on nochili.com on Sundays. And the star of the show is my uncle-in-law, who goes simply by Uncle. So he is the guy in charge. It revolves around him. I'm just the co-host. I kind of keep things rolling along. We take calls. It's just a fun comedy podcast, and it's pretty off the wall, and I want to say unique.
That's an interesting combination. It reminds me, I just recently had a conversation with Sam Tripoli, who has the Tinfoil Hat podcast, and then he's a veteran of comedy, stand-up comedy for 3-4 decades. So, well, you got to have a sense of humor. If you don't laugh, you'll cry, I guess. We're talking transhumanism. And I was mentioning this idea of technology and one of the effects of electronic technology, pulling us out of our bodies. And McLuhan also talked about how drug and alcohol abuse really, as he saw it, is an attempt by people to get back into their bodies. You drink and you do drugs, and just, I don't know, maybe to slow things down. I'm not sure exactly where he was going with that, but I was also talking about the acceleration of the technology and how some people just will not be able to cope. Um, let's just maybe explore that a little bit. We were talking about Encino Men, and I'm one of those. I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can cope with it.
Yeah, no, I get it. And this is something that I kind of find myself coming around to more and more these days is I started talking about these to kind of like throw the flag up and warn everybody like, hey, this is coming. This is not good. Things don't look good. What are we going to do? We have to do something about this. And now I'm legitimately concerned about what the reactionary side from the public is going to be from all of this. And I'd say there's already a lot of reactionary elements in our society at present that deeply disturb me. And projecting what's happening now into the future, where you add in to the equation more emerging technology, really like changing things and really like dramatic, potentially very dangerous technologies put out there, people reacting in a frantic, panicked sort of way, I think is what's going to happen very likely. And I don't know. I'm trying to, if everybody could calm down. I don't, I don't know. I just, all these reactionary elements
You
and in
mean by
particular,
reactionary? Do you mean like, let's say, like the Luddites during the Industrial Revolution, who were so concerned about mechanization and how it would throw everybody out of work? They literally went into the factories and with, I don't know, clubs and hammers and started smashing, machinery. Is that what you mean by the reactionary forces?
well, kind of. That's the example that's brought up a lot in this, and I think the Luddite movement gets a lot of flack and is was a little like ahead of its time, and I understand why people would feel that way. But by the time the new version of that happens, I feel like so much like baggage. There's a lot of, frankly, political baggage out there that goes along with calling the establishment into question these days that frankly troubles me. I very much am concerned with Silicon Valley, what everybody there, like the real movers and shakers in Silicon Valley, what they're up to, their connections to, yes, the government, the US government, the military, all of the big players there, big business, military, government. That's serious stuff. Um, Now, when when transhuman technologies start being deployed, if we publicly respond with some really ridiculous like cliches, like insert some sort of like political slogan, like we're gonna make we're gonna tear technology down and we're gonna make things great again, right? That sort of thing. That's I don't see that working out. Um, there's just so many layers to that. I hardly even know where to begin. But I would just warn people uh, looking into these things to and I would recommend maintaining a cool head, even though it may be hard to do as the years go on and on. I'm working on myself to do that, like personally. Like I keep a cool head no matter what happens, because if you go flying off the handle, if you're going to like uh go charge into battle, so to speak, there's going to be a lot of rabble rousers out there. There's going to be a lot of them. I would just say be careful who you listen to if they're trying to get you to join the cavalry, so to speak. Look out for those types, I would say.
Okay, so do you want to maybe talk about some other developments in like transhumanism? When I think of transhumanism, and I know it's not limited to this, but I tend to think of again dramatic life extension and this push to, I don't know, take what is the essence of a human, their consciousness, their memories, their personality, all which reside in the mind, wherever that is, inside or outside the body, and sort of re-sleeve it into a machine that will not know biological death. Is that too limited a description of transhumanism, do you think?
Well, it's one little alleyway. Transhumanism is very broad. I mean, and certainly they talk about this is, well, let's take our consciousness, upload that to a machine so that we can live inside that machine forever. We were talking about internet, and I was saying how we live there now.
Mm-hmm.
They're taking that idea, but going further with it, obviously, and the concept of eternal life is definitely there. So there's religious aspects to the transhumanist idea. It's a faith, to be sure. Um, that's an interesting area in and of itself, is where you kind of point out the religious aspects of it, because for so long, your typical transhumanist, and still a lot of typical transhumanist technophile types, tend toward atheism, agnosticism, bare minimum.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, any sort of, if the word religion pops up, they have a reactionary response to it, which again, the reactionary thing doesn't quite jive too well with me. But yeah, they'll instantly defend themselves, like, it's not a religion, it's the opposite of a religion, this is a reason, this is logic, blah blah blah. We have a website that proves all the facts of it. So very, it's an interesting group, the transhumanists, and I wouldn't lump them all together like they're all the same either. There's like these little sub communities even. There's people who are very much into the idea of, yeah, we got to make artificial intelligence is coming, but also artificial general intelligence is going to come and kill us all, right? Like Eliezer Yudkowsky is very much on this, and he's famous for, I don't know if he runs the site or he's the moderator or what his role is, but the lesswrong.com website. And that's a good example of like the atheist sort of, like, they're very, very rigid about, yes, we're following reason and logic, and we're not falling for all of the pitfalls that humanity has fallen for before. And but then they'll go and say something that you would think is contrarian, like, oh yeah, we want AGI, but it's going to kill us all. And then you've got infighting because these other transhumanists are like, what are you doing? You're like poisoning the punch bowl here, that we're trying to push for this stuff, and you're saying it's going to kill everybody. What are you doing? So I would point out that the transhumanist world is another fringe community. Listeners to this show might be familiar with fringe communities. I consider myself a part of the fringe. I mean, that's what I've been doing all these years. It's fine, but I like to just understand that's what they are. I'm at this point in my journey. I'm trying very much not to be judgmental of any of them. I'm just kind of seeing them and kind of comparing what they're doing to what I'm doing and what I've been doing, and seeing similarities, seeing differences. And I see quite a few similarities. And I think if critics of transhumanism want to get, if you want something really good, like, actually notice how the transhumanists are a fringe group and how they're similar to you, if we were to do that, I think we might avoid a lot of the reactionary problems I foresee in the future. Although I I also kind of don't have a lot of hope in that. I don't know.
I see them as well, as you mentioned, many of them are, or maybe most of them, atheistic or at the very least agnostic, materialists.
Mhm,
Maybe,
mhm,
I mean, God is not in the equation. They see humans as little more than like meat robots, and
mhm,
so if you take the soul and spirituality and God out of the equation, it's, you know, what's the harm in extending the best before date of a meat robot? You know, what's to stand in the way of that? There's nothing. There's nothing. We'll take another time out and continue to talk about transhumanism with Aaron Franz, host of the Age of Transitions podcast. Back with more in a moment. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. Aaron Franz is with us, host of the podcast, The Age of Transitions. How do we listen once again, Aaron?
Well, you could go to my website, theageoftransitions.com. All the podcasts are there. It's also a live show on ocelli.com Sunday nights at 10 p.m. Eastern. You can listen to that too.
And the book is Revolve, Man's Scientific Rise to Godhood, released back in 2014. And that's available on Amazon and I would assume wherever good books are sold.
Yep. You can also find it on my website too, theageoftransitions.com. Yep.
Excellent. So this quest for immortality, you call it, or in your book, you mentioned the philosopher's stone of the alchemists now appears to be within reach. But where does transhumanism and artificial intelligence, where do they connect? Where do they merge?
Well, I suppose the point that they all talk about the singularity, where artificial general intelligence hits the scene, machines become conscious, they become super intelligent, and they begin the process of taking over the reins of society, is the idea, because now the machine is so powerful and it is alive and conscious that it just takes over. And the transhumanists hope that it will take us along for the ride and upgrade us, so to speak, right? So that's the idea. So I guess, I mean, that would be it. AGI comes, and then we all become enhanced humans thanks to artificial intelligence.
And how do you see um, organizations like the World Economic Forum, the guy that I think is sort of generally perceived to be number 2 to Klaus Schwab is this guy Yuval Noah Harari, and I don't have a handle on him. I can't tell whether he is a critic and issuing a warning, or if he's a devotee and basically is saying this is happening. I like it, and there's nothing you can do about it. What is your sense of this Harari fellow?
I have to plead ignorance on Harari. I've not looked into him. I, of course, know of the WEF and Schwab. They've made big headlines. So, I mean, it's another one of those elite groups that, of course, you have to be careful of them, and disdain for them is the correct reaction, I would say there. But no, I haven't looked into him actually. So that's somebody you got to check out.
Well, he talks about how, we're gonna hack the human mind. We're gonna the human brain. We're gonna hack the human body. Um, some of his critics, and I don't know if this is an unfair portrayal of his views, that basically, we are gods and there's nothing you can do to stop us.
Well, I mean, there have been others that have said that in those words, like not even like a paraphrase. There are many that have said, "Yeah, we will become gods." There is that film by Frank Thies, Technocalypse, where that Richard Seed guy, he was in genetics, I think, and he was saying, "We'll become gods if you get in our way, then I'll push you out of the way," something like that. And so, you have things like that. And even Kurzweil, his little quote at the end of his biopic was, they ask him, "Do you believe in God?" He says, "No, we haven't made it yet." So they're always making
Hmm.
these things. I think they make comments like that, honestly, to get a reaction from the other side of the aisle. So I would warn people of that. Like when these guys say this stuff, just be like, whatever. And like if they get you all riled up and all worked up, like I would suggest that's what they want. Now, I sit and think about why they might want you to go a little crazy when they say that sort of thing. That's my personal suggestion at this moment in time. Stop and think why they want you so mad about this, because I think they do.
Right. I agree. I think we're seeing that with governments too. It's almost like they wake up each morning and figure out, how can I really piss people off today? Let me do let me do the opposite of something that's like common sense. Um, or it's almost like part of a demoralization program. They're trying to demoralize us, or they're trying to provoke us. Like, those are kind of maybe exclusive. You can't, if you're demoralized, you can't provoke because you just give up. So I'm not sure. Is it provoke or demoralize? What are they trying to do?
Well, I mean, maybe both. I mean, it just depends on if you can demoralize a portion, then good, then they'll be off there. We don't have to worry about them. The people that you provoke, if you can push them in a certain direction, then that's good, right? So I think they're not mutually exclusive.
Right. Okay. It's kind of a two pronged attack. And so for those that provoke, and then they lash out in violence, now you have license to clamp down, suspend more civil liberties, increase surveillance, that type of thing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's the nail on the head as far as I'm concerned, Richard. I would, again, moving in the future, just be aware of that. Like, don't play the part of the villain in this screenplay that seems to be written out already. Just be careful what you do. Don't put the black hat on and go play the role out.
So how do we maintain our humanity? Do you have kind of a game plan, as arguably we become less human? How do you plan to survive?
Just, I mean, take it one day at a time. And I think that there are going to be things that are going to be tests, and you do have to take a stand on certain things, just being ready for that sort of thing to happen. But also, just at smaller scale, just when you see certain things that just aren't right, just, stand up and speak out against it, or do what you have to do in the moment. I use the image of the tank man from Tiananmen Square for my podcast logo, because I've always, that ethos of like, something happens out of nowhere, and without even thinking about it, just in the middle of doing whatever you're doing, you just know you have to, stand in front of a tank or something, And in that case, that's literally what happened. But, just having that frame of mind, just, be ready for the machine to come rolling down the street any day, because that's probably what's going to happen.
But you don't want to get rolled over like he did.
Well, I mean, I don't want to, no, but is that, here today, gone tomorrow. I'm not in control ultimately of what happens, and you
But
gotta.
are there smaller steps? Like, I mean, I don't know, just bringing it down to a very sort of day to day practical level. Like, do you resist the trend towards a cashless society by insisting on paying in cash? Do you, um, I don't know, do you go down to the city hall and demand to see the the city plan? Are we going to become a 15-minute city? That kind of stuff. Like,
Yeah, that's great. Anything that anybody's doing like that, I think is great. Yeah, and any sort of just little stuff that you can do like that goes a long way. The same concept of vote with your dollar. Well, like, what kind of world do you want to live in? Do that, or like, don't carry your phone everywhere. Just something simple like that. I do think that makes a difference, as silly as it sounds. If you can do that, you'll at least be living life on your terms where you can. And yeah, I would definitely advocate for that.
is there anything short of, I don't know, like a Carrington event, like a major EMP that is going to stop this?
I don't know. One thing that kind of I can't like shake, but see as like an inevitability is kind of like a cyber version of like 9/11. I keep thinking like that's going to happen because there's just so much opportunity for a cyber disaster. Honestly, everything's been digitized. It seems like that's what we all want. Like, well, let's digitize the entire world and hope nothing bad happens to it. Well, of course, somebody can come in there and just like mess with the whole thing, and you see little versions of it, but I just feel like at some point it's going to happen almost like at a national level. And I just hope that the ensuing reaction by the public isn't at all similar to what it was with 9/11, because that was an utter mess. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean that begs the question: would we survive that? We've become so dependent. It's like with the Carrington event, back in the 1850s. Unless you worked in a telegraph office or you tried to get on a street a trolley, nobody really noticed because we were not an electrified civilization at that point. But if a Carrington event happened now and we're in the dark for an extended period of time, I mean, I've read reports where about 90% of North Americans would be dead within a year. I mean, that's how dependent we are on electricity. And now we're that dependent on a digitized world, for payments and everything from water filtration plants. It's all online. Would we survive? I guess, but that's the topic of another discussion. Aaron, it's a great pleasure to meet you and speak with you. We'll have to do this again.
Thank you so much for having me here, Richard.
The Age of Transitions podcast. How do we listen?
Theageoftransitions.com. All the podcasts are there. But again, live Sunday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern on Ochelli.com.
Fantastic. Until we speak again, Aaron, thank you. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. Hey there, and welcome once again to another episode of Strange Planet. Thanks as always for sticking me in your ear. And if you'd like to get deeper into Strange Planet, you might consider becoming a premium subscriber. It's real easy to do. Just click on the link in the episode notes, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. You gain access to commercial-free listening, bonus episodes, and you get a subscription to my monthly newsletter, Inner Sanctum, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. All right, we're going to get into a very, very interesting story tonight. It involves the great Prohibition agent Eliot Ness, the man who helped bring down Al Capone in Chicago. And we're going to combine his remarkable story with a grisly spree of unsolved murders in Cleveland at the height of the Depression. This is the subject of a brand new book called American Demon, Eliot Ness and the Hunt for America's Jack the Ripper. And Daniel Stashower is an American author and editor of mystery fiction and historical nonfiction, New York Times bestseller, and also an award winner, Edgar Award for Best Critical Biographies, Best Fact Crime, first novel by an American author. He's won the Anthony Award for Best Critical Nonfiction, the Agatha Award a number of times for Best Short Story, Best Nonfiction, Best Paperback Original, and again, the latest, American Demon, Eliot Ness and the Hunt for America's Jack the Ripper. Daniel Stashower, welcome to Strange Planet. How are you?
I'm just fine. Thank you, Richard.
I'm trying to imagine you as a 9-year-old boy sitting around a campfire roasting marshmallows and first being introduced, because you grew up in Cleveland, being introduced to this rather grisly tale. Just take us back there to 9 years old and how you learned about the.
Yes, it was the first I'd heard of this series of crimes. As you mentioned, I grew up in Cleveland, and I was at an overnight camp, and we were roasting marshmallows around a campfire, and the counselor thought it would be just a terrific idea to entertain this group of campers with the story of a gruesome series of murders carried out by a killer who had not been caught, that had taken place in woods very much like the ones that surrounded us there outside of Cleveland. I don't think any of us slept at all that night. I remember the phrase, and the killer was never found, was repeated over and over again. And so we had to, and I remember also we had to stop him to get him to explain what the word decapitated meant. But he got through the story and sent us off to in our tents. And as I say, I'm sure most of us had a white knuckle night, listening for sounds and snapping twigs and things outside the tents. Well, sure enough, 50 years later, lo and behold, I'm an author, and I have a particular interest in true crime. I'd always wanted to do a story set in my hometown. And this seemed to just seemed like an ideal opportunity. Only now I am the camp counselor, and you have to bring your own marshmallows.
The Cleveland torso murderer, also known as the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. So just kind of set the scene for us. Again, early, or I guess mid 1930s and 1935 to about 38.
Yeah,
discovery of these, the initial discovery of some of these bodies.
Well, it's just one horrifying scene after another. As you mentioned, this is during the worst years of the Great Depression, and this string of absolutely brutal murders is unfolding. Horrible and seemingly without precedent. Each of the victims appeared to have been beheaded. Some, it seemed, while still alive. And the remains, in most cases, were painstakingly dismembered and scattered across the city. So the horror was everywhere. A pair of schoolboys would stumble over a headless torso, or a severed limb would be seen floating along the Cuyahoga River, or a skull would be found rattling around in a tin can at the city dump. And each atrocity touched off a cycle of fear and outrage and calls for action in the newspapers. One reporter said he was that almost unknown creature, a master criminal. And he added, it can be argued powerfully that he was the greatest murderer of all time.
This is in an era before a lot of, forensic tools were at the disposal of the police. I don't even know if the term serial killer had entered the popular lexicon. How quickly was it established that it was one individual responsible for all these murders?
It took a while. It took a while before the police realized that they were dealing with a series of connected crimes. But at one stage, a body was discovered barely a mile away from where two others had been found a few months earlier, and the scale of the thing snapped into focus. An investigator told the press that he and his detectives were on the trail of a crazed killer with a flair for butchery. But as you mentioned, this is the 1930s. Modern forensics techniques like criminal profiling, that stuff hasn't happened yet. But even so, the Cleveland police threw everything they had at it. And they even improvised new techniques. They were trying to push through the limitations of the resources of the day and the technology of the time. The coroner pulled together a panel of experts just to hear their ideas to produce what they called a synthetic portrait of the killer. Today, we would recognize that as profiling. And at another stage, the police went looking for a particular suspect, but they couldn't find a photograph of him. So all they had was a childhood photo. So they projected this childhood image onto a canvas, and they had an artist alter and embellish the image to approximate the man's present day appearance, like the age progression software that we have today. Again and again, you see these detectives just really putting their elbow, their shoulder to the door, really trying to muscle their way in. They did their best. But as one of the newspapers would ask, what fantastic chemistry of the civilized mind converted this killer into a human butcher? And that turned out to be a very tough nut to crack.
Were the media immediately sort of making the obvious parallels to Jack the Ripper that had taken place, his killing spree, like 50 years earlier?
Yep, that happened quite quickly, largely because the crimes in Cleveland overlapped with the 50th anniversary of the Ripper crimes in London, in the Autumn of Terror that began in August of 1888. And a lot of the coverage of the American crimes drew explicit parallels to the Ripper crimes, and not only to the crimes themselves, but also to the climate of fear that surrounded them. And it got increasingly lurid over time. There was talk about murder studios, and there were photographs of severed heads and editorials about a madman whose god is the guillotine. And there were a lot of parallels to the Ripper crimes, but there were also a lot of inconsistencies in the American crimes that caused real headaches for the investigators. Some of the victims of the Cleveland Butcher were prostitutes, like the Ripper's victims, but in general, there was no pattern. There were men and women, black and white, straight and gay. The victims were all found to be indigents. They were drifters and small-time criminals. And in the phrase that was used over and over again, they were people who would not be missed.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about, a lot of these bodies were found, I think it was called the Hobo Jungle, Kingsbury Run, Jackass Hill. Not the greatest neighborhoods.
No, and Kingsbury Run in particular, is this gloomy thread of land, this ancient dried up riverbed that sort of curls through the city. And during the Depression years, it had become a focus of homeless encampments and shanty towns. And it had once been a garden spot. People went picnicking there, but over the years, it had really become this. It was just given over to these shanty towns, and it seemed that the killer was preying on the indigent population who inhabited the shanty towns there.
How many bodies, how many victims, have we even established that definitively?
It as with the Ripper case, where there's a canonical set of victims, that in this case, the number is generally thought to be 12 or 13, but that there are many people who believe that the killer operated in a field, cast his net much wider than that. Over the course of time that these crimes were being investigated in Cleveland, there were some similar crime scenes uncovered nearby in Pennsylvania, in an area that was connected by a direct railroad line. And there was a strong feeling at the time that perhaps these were attributable to the same killer. And people who have come to feel over the years that when the heat got to be turned up too high in Cleveland, the killer just moved on and continued elsewhere.
It must have been very difficult even to establish the identity of the victims. I mean, you find, again, this is before DNA testing and so forth. You have severed heads, you have dismembered limbs, maybe just a torso. Even the torso may have been dissected, cut in half. Talk to me about how they managed to identify these victims.
Many of them never were identified, and but they did their best in each case to get an identity, assuming that knowing who the victim was would lead them to the identity of the killer, particularly if they could find some connection between the victims. But it was very, very hard to do. They got a lucky break early on with a woman who had a criminal record, and they were able to get fingerprints. But a lot of them, they never did identify them. At one stage, there was this victim whose body was covered with tattoos, really unique tattoos. The cartoon character Jiggs, a popular cartoon character of the time, was tattooed on his leg. There were names tattooed on his arms. There were things that appeared to suggest military service. But it was this very strange combination, this tableau of tattoos all over his body. And you would think that someone with these kinds of identifying marks would not be hard to identify. Well, they sent out feelers to tattoo parlors all across the United States, and at one point even put this victim's head on display in the city morgue, inviting people to come by and take a look in case anyone was able to put a name to the face. I mean, those are the lengths they went to. Again, they were leaving no stone unturned. They were really, really pushing hard. But the nature of these killers were such that a fair number of the victims never were identified.
The tattooed man, I guess now forever known as John Doe 2. I think there were, 4 John Does and maybe an equal number of Jane Does never identified?
There were quite a few, and the ones who were identified, although they ran down every lead, every connection, every possible avenue they could, no matter how seemingly unpromising, they never got very far with the victims they were able to identify.
You mentioned fingerprints to identify. It was a female victim. Was that Florence Polillo?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit more, because this is pretty early on, I would imagine, in the art of fingerprinting and so forth. Maybe I'm wrong, but tell me about the investigator who he carried around his collection of fingerprints in a shoebox.
Yeah, it was a remarkable man who had had his whole career with the Cleveland Police Department, and he had this very, very elaborate system, and he was also a big advocate of the Bertillon system of identification with the measurements of the heads. His name was Kessel, and he was at the end of his career when this case surfaced. But he'd been an early proponent of fingerprint identification. He began collecting fingerprints in Cleveland, I think in 1906, well before fingerprints had become the gold standard, accepted as evidence in American courtrooms. And in 1 year alone, he matched the prints of nearly 2,000 suspects to fingerprint cards that he already had on file, and identified 7 John Does in the county morgue. These weren't connected to this series of crimes, but he had made this remarkable progress in fingerprint identification. And when the body of this woman was found horribly dismembered and wrapped in newspapers and put into straw baskets that were found behind a butcher shop, just as gruesome a crime as you can imagine. Wow. Kessel managed to dive into his fingerprint file. He had I think it was 12,000 cards on file, and he came out a short time later with an identification, and they discovered the identity of this woman, and they worked that lead just as hard as they could. This was fairly early in the series of crimes. They contacted everyone who'd had anything to do with her. She was a woman who had worked at least partly at various times in the past as a prostitute, and they tracked down as many of the men who had crossed her path as they possibly could. They found an ex-husband and brought him to town, but ultimately it went nowhere.
I guess this individual is listed as a possible victim, the Lady of the Lake.
Yes, that was fairly early on. A man was gathering firewood along the shores of Lake Erie, and he came upon these remains. This was at a time when there was no idea of a series of crimes being carried out. And the police did everything they could to identify that victim, especially after a second set of remains turned up that matched up perfectly with the first section of a human torso that had been found. With that one, they even employed Boy Scouts to help scan the shore of Lake Erie looking for remains. I mean, can you imagine what that merit badge would look like? But it shows again how hard they were working to get traction in this investigation.
We'll take a quick timeout, come back. More of my conversation with Daniel Stashower, the author of American Demon, Eliot Ness, and the Hunt for America's Jack the Ripper. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. Welcome back. Daniel Stashower is with us, American Demon, Elliot Ness on the hunt for America's Jack the Ripper. He's a New York Times bestselling author, Edgar Award winner. And I just realized I'm wearing my rock and roll museum or a rock and roll Hall of Fame t-shirt from Cleveland. And here we are talking about Cleveland. That was not planned. So the other thing I wanted to get into was the scope of this investigation, the largest in Cleveland history, not surprisingly. But how many suspects did they have? It was like in the thousands and thousands, wasn't it?
It was. There were, and as a result of the scope of the investigation, the number of people they pulled in and questioned, they wound up clearing a lot of old cases that had nothing to do with this series of crimes, but they did wind up solving other crimes. There were detectives involved who put in just all kinds of overtime and extra hours. There was one detective, a man named Peter Marilow, who dressed up as a hobo and set himself out as bait, hoping to draw the killer into an attack. That was the degree of dedication that was shown. And this detective also, if you can imagine, spent his 2-week vacation over in Pennsylvania investigating those crimes to get a sense of were these crimes connected to the Cleveland series or not. These guys just thought nothing, they were not leaving anything behind. They were, Marilow in particular, possibly the most dedicated man ever to put on a police uniform. So it was a particular source of frustration for people like this who dedicated so much time and energy, worked so hard and done such good work, when time and again the clues started to dry up and they fell back into a familiar pattern of frustration.
They utilized polygraph testing during the investigation. How new was that?
It was very new, and yes, that was used. It was not admissible in court at that time. Fairly new technology, but so much so that it was hard to get access to a machine. And they used all kinds of techniques, things that we recognize, that we would recognize today, from techniques that are assisted by computers, that they did just through a good old-fashioned shoe leather and knocking on doors.
So enter the great Prohibition agent Elliot Ness, who comes to Cleveland, I guess, for Act 2 of his career. But there may be a few people out there who really don't know a lot about Elliot Ness outside of maybe the Kevin Costner, Robert De Niro movie, The Untouchables. So just talk to us about Elliot Ness as we know him best from his days in Chicago, taking an axe to beer barrels and so forth.
Yeah, in many ways, Elliot Ness is exactly what you think. He's a hero, a man of great integrity and bravery, but he's also more than that, more than the tough guy that we know from TV and the movies. As you mentioned, he rose to fame during the Prohibition years as the man who got Al Capone. And he's remembered today as the leader of the Untouchables. This was this legendary team of Prohibition agents. You mentioned the old black and white TV series. I remember it from childhood, although I only ever saw it in reruns. And a lot of people out there will have seen the movie with Kevin Costner as Ness and Robert De Niro as Capone. When people think of Elliot Ness, they usually think of a big truck smashing through the doors of an illegal brewery and falling on the beer barrels with an axe. The real Elliot Ness was more than that. He was a very forward-thinking reformer. So yes, he was astonishingly brave, and these exploits in Chicago were spectacular. But on screen, usually, particularly in the Untouchables TV show, the problems get solved with violence. And in real life, he rarely even carried a gun. He once told a friend that he didn't need it. The empty holster was enough. And he brought off some of his bravest moments with that empty holster. He believed in the science of police work and pushing police techniques forward in the lab.
And I guess through the movie, we tend to believe that he was responsible for bringing down Capone, but it was the U.S. Treasury Department, wasn't it? Agents that came over from the U.S. Treasury Department that did this forensic accounting that ultimately led to Capone's demise.
Yes, and the movie and the TV shows, and it's easy to get the impression that that Ness brought Capone down all by himself. He would have resisted that characterization. He recognized himself as a part of a larger team effort to bring down Capone. And as you mentioned, yes, it was the taxmen who moved in and got him on tax evasion charges. But Ness played a very important part. He and his men were disrupting the system of bribes and payouts that kept Capone's empire going. They dried up his revenue so that the taxmen could move in and do their work. Ness himself once gave an interview in which he said, yes, the real work was done by the Treasury agents. Our job was more spectacular. That's all. And you can understand the press are trying to find a handle on this story. Capone is being prosecuted on this strict interpretation of tax law. And at the center of it, there's this bold, handsome, young prohibition agent driving a truck through the doors of the breweries. Well, surely that's the story you're going to lead with. Which movie would you rather see? So Ness got an awful lot of publicity at the time, and he was proud of the dangerous work that he'd done in Chicago. But he was careful to share the credit with the men he was working with.
Incorruptible and humble. So he takes this job in Cleveland. Did he go to Cleveland right after Chicago and take the job of director of public safety, or was there something that happened in between?
No, not right away. We don't, and we think of him as a Chicago guy because that's where all the drama with Al Capone played out. I think a lot of people don't realize how brief that chapter of his life was. It was pretty much wrapped up by the time he turned 30. And as you mentioned, he needed a second act. And he landed the job as a director of public safety after a couple of years in the wilderness, almost literally in the wilderness, chasing after moonshiners. But this job is a huge, huge promotion. He's in charge of the entire police department and the fire department and a whole lot more. It was such a big job, a lot of people assumed he'd fall flat on his face. In Chicago, as leader of the Untouchables, he'd been in charge of a handful of guys. Now, at a stroke, he's in charge of thousands of city employees in one of America's biggest cities. And nothing in his background had prepared him for a challenge on this scale. And a lot of people assumed he would fall flat on his face. And in fact, some people who were used to business in Cleveland being done the way it had always been done were kind of looking forward to it. This young glamour boy coming in. But the miracle of it is the degree to which he succeeded. But it was a real struggle to win over the support of the men who served under him and to fill his own shoes.
Did Cleveland come looking for Eliot Ness as a result, in part of the serial killings, or was it because they had the same problems that Chicago and probably other big cities had? Criminal, organized crime, and basically corrupt officials, city officials.
Cleveland had a new reform-minded mayor whose name was Harold Burton. And he had a plan to lift the city out of the slump that it was in during the Great Depression by clamping down on crime. This was an equation that Ness understood. He'd seen it in Chicago. He knew that the economy and uncontrolled crime were inextricably linked. Ness's marching orders when he came to Cleveland were to clean up the police department, which was basically rotting from the inside because of corruption, and also to try to break the stranglehold that the mob had over the city. Now, imagine getting that set of marching orders on your first day. Yeah, clear up corruption in the police department and take down the mob, and then if you've got time, break for lunch. I mean, it's a huge job, and the miracle is the degree to which he succeeded. One of his reporter friends said, his timing was absolutely perfect. The city had seldom needed a hero so badly. And when he got to town and began to show the city what could be done, he became that hero.
Daniel will take another time out, come back and discuss more. Eliot Ness arrives in Cleveland to save the day. Back with more in a moment. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. New York Times bestselling author and Edgar Award winner Daniel Stashower is with us. The new book is American Demon, Eliot Ness and the Hunt for America's Jack the Ripper. When Eliot Ness arrived in Cleveland, was that in the midst of this killing spree and the Cleveland's Mad Butcher? Or
the murders had started, but they had not yet gotten the recognition as a series of crimes. So the murders began before Ness came to town, but they really gathered force during his time in office. So much so that eventually the mayor urged him to take personal control of the investigation, which it's fair to say was probably not a job that he wanted. But he felt a responsibility to take it on.
Right. I mean, he's not a homicide detective.
He's not.
So
the Eliot Ness from television would have strapped on his gun and gone kicking down doors. But the real Eliot Ness is a different guy. And it's important to point out, as you suggest, catching killers wasn't his job. He'd never done that, and he wasn't hired to do that. He wasn't hired to be a homicide detective any more than he would have been hired as a fireman or a crossing guard. He was the director of public safety. He was at the top of the pyramid. The chief of police reported to him. Nobody expects the director of public safety to go out and solve a murder any more than they expect him to walk a beat or rescue a cat stranded in a tree, except when it's Eliot Ness. People did expect it from Eliot Ness. They expected heroics. Ness had made a point of saying that he would not be a remote director. He would not be locked away in his office in City Hall. He said he would lead from the front lines. He would do his own investigative work. So over time, as the pattern of these crimes gathered force, he had to step in.
And when he stepped in, what did he do? How did he organize? I don't know, like a what would we call it today, a task force, or what did he do
He
specifically?
did. Yeah, that's exactly what he did. He put together a team in the mold of the Untouchables. And for a time, they worked outside the system and under the radar, trying to get information off of the criminal grapevine. And that's not to say that he ignored the official effort. He devoted extra resources and manpower to the official effort. But this smaller, hands-on effort was very typical of him. It's how he approached his campaign on gambling. It was how he was rooting out corruption in the ranks. That was the kind of thing he did. He liked to be out in the field. He said very little about the case publicly, but there was one notable statement. He said, "I'm going to do all I can to aid in the investigation. I want to see this psycho caught."
Hmm. How did the media treat Ness in Cleveland in terms of this investigation? Did they put pressure on him? How did that go?
Everybody put pressure on him. The media put pressure on him. He put pressure on himself. And certainly the longer these crimes dragged on, the more that pressure was felt. There was one turning point that came when Ness decided that it would be useful to lead a raid into the shantytown encampments near, in and around Kingsbury Run, to basically go knocking on, rousting sleeping people. This was done in darkness, and bring them all in hopes of either finding the killer in the act, or depriving him of his hunting grounds. And when all was said and done, these shanty towns were burned. And this was not a great moment for Ness in terms of his relations with the press. He'd had their support, he'd been lionized, but this marked a turning point in the relationship, and it was felt he'd gone too far.
The actual murder, did he kind of taunted Ness, didn't he? Similar to like the Rodriguez in LA, was writing notes and so forth to the investigators.
It's a complicated story because he never did find evidence that he could hang on that guy. So whether or not this this suspect, who was known initially as Dr. X, was the killer or not, is going to be argued, like the identity of Jack the Ripper, for as long as people discuss such things. But from the beginning, the investigators believed that the killer had knowledge and training that allowed for the surgical precision of the dismemberments that had been performed on the victims. They thought it was a doctor or a butcher. That was the theory. And soon Ness and his team zeroed in on a guy that they liked for the crime. He was a doctor who had fallen on hard times and had a substance abuse problem. He checked a lot of boxes. So they started tailing him around town. And apparently, Dr. X took a perverse pleasure in it, as if it were a form of hide and seek. There are stories that he even called into police headquarters to taunt the investigators on the poor quality of their surveillance effort. He'd pick up the phone and say something to the effect of, "Boy, that guy you had tailing me wasn't very good. If he wants to try again, I'll be at such and such a department store tomorrow afternoon." Well, at one stage, Ness and his men scooped this guy up and grilled him for a long time in a hotel suite. The details are sketchy and they're contradictory. One of Ness's colleagues said the interrogation went on for a week or two in 8-hour stretches. But the suspect never cracked, and Ness finally had to let him go. As I said, people are going to argue until the end of time whether this was the actual killer, in the same way that we talk about the grassy knoll or Jack the Ripper. Ness was alert to the possibility of other suspects, but he seems to have believed that this was the guy.
There's a possible link to the Black Dahlia murder in LA in 38.
Some have said it. I don't think it was investigated at the time and found that it did not hold water, but that is something that comes up along with other crimes all across the country that bear a resemblance to one degree or another to the series in Cleveland.
Did the alleged murder sort of confess to that murder, the Black Dahlia murder, Elizabeth Short, to Ness in a letter, or is that an apocryphal story? Or
no, that didn't happen. And in fact, in these taunting postcards that you mentioned, only a handful of them survive, and they're preserved in scrapbooks at Cleveland's Western Reserve Historical Society. It's really remarkable. I mean, they come off as this rambling swirl of ink blots and this rising blast furnace of craziness and hatred directed at Ness. And there are a couple of points at which it walks right up to the line of being something that you could interpret as a confession, but it never crosses that line. So he never gave anything to Ness that would stand up in court.
Very clever. Let's talk about that scrapbook. As you're leafing through that, a familiar face pops up. Tell us about that.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I spent a lot of time looking through Ness's papers and family scrapbooks, and as you'd expect, there were a lot of familiar faces. There's Capone, there are other gangsters, and also a lot of the era's shining lights, FDR, John D. Rockefeller, J. Edgar Hoover. And I'm paging through, and suddenly a very familiar face jumps out at me, and it was my grandfather, Fred Stashower. Now, I thought it must be a mistake. I thought I dozed off or something. So I'd love to be able to tell you that my grandfather was a bootlegger or a bank robber or, a murder suspect. But it turns out that Ness and my grandfather crossed paths at least once a year at a political roast. This was like a Comedy Central roast that happened every year. And my grandfather, I came to find out, was a cast member for years and years, and Ness was a frequent target. They called them the goats, and Ness was always one of the goats, the people that they made fun of. And apparently Ness took it in stride. He cut out an article about this thing, a caricature of some of the actors, including my grandfather, pasted it into his scrapbook, and also a photograph of himself with his hand pressed to his forehead as if he's sort of doubled over in appreciation of the joke. I can't tell you what a surprise it was for me, because I knew my grandfather for 34 years. This was long after the Untouchables TV series and even the Kevin Costner movie. I don't recall that he ever mentioned Elliot Ness by name, but it's great to know that Ness could laugh at himself. He may have been untouchable, but the man could take a joke.
Yeah, well, add that to his list of attributes: incorruptible, humble, and a good sense of humor. So obviously he didn't solve, well, the investigators didn't solve it, remains unsolved. Did Ness take this as a personal failure, that they never caught the butcher, the torso murderer?
I don't think he did. The crimes did stop, and I believe Ness was able to take some satisfaction. He certainly came to believe that the intensity of their investigation had played a role in that. It's important to remember that Ness's evidence also was not the evidence that sent Al Capone to prison. Although Ness gathered plenty of evidence, and they were preparing to prosecute Ness on this prohibition evidence that Ness and his team had gathered, Capone went away on tax charges, but they had defanged the serpent, and Capone was no longer a threat to the city of Chicago. The killing stopped in Cleveland, and I believe Ness could had to be, he obviously, he would have liked a more conclusive wrapping up, but I believe he was able to take satisfaction again in having defanged the serpent.
What becomes of Eliot Ness after Cleveland? Does he just move on to the next job?
It's not a happy story. At many times during his time as safety director, people were urging him to go into business, to step on, to take on lucrative business opportunities, to basically cash in on his success and on his fame. Ness liked the job he had. He said, "I may take one of those jobs one day, but for the moment, I've got a job to do." After his time as safety director was over, he went into service during the Second World War, and also served there with considerable distinction. And when he came out, and it was time to try to take advantage, move back to Cleveland and make some bank, his moment had passed, and he struggled for the rest of his life, really to find job security. It's unfortunate. At one point, he ran for mayor, but again, his moment had passed. He was defeated, and he died fairly young, in his 50s, of a heart attack.
And penniless, from what I understand.
Virtually. And although by that time, the book that became The Untouchables was underway, and Ness saw the page proofs, he did not live to see the book published, and he did not live to see the thunderclap of fame and renown that followed.
Sad. It's a fascinating and perhaps little known chapter in American history. American Demon, Eliot Ness and the Hunt for America's Jack the Ripper. Daniel, great speaking with you. Thank you so much for this.
My pleasure. Thank you.
How do we get the book?
It's available at bookstores everywhere, and it's out in paperback now.
Fantastic. American Demon. Check it out. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there.